everybody, What Culture's Adam Cleary here, and I have just been to see Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, if you are familiar with the concept of cinema, you will know that because I went to see the beginning of the film, that now also means I've seen the ending of the film, eh? So this is it. This is your spoilers warning from, once I stop this sentence, then that is past the point of no return. It's your own fault if anything gets spoiled once I finish saying this sentence that I am saying now. Alright, okay, here we are, just the grown-ups in the room. Just when you thought it was safe to get back in the multiverse, Marvel brings in its first movie of Phase 4. I know it's not the first movie of Phase 4. I know like Black Widow and the TV stuff and stuff like that. I know it's not the first thing of Phase 4, but this was the first bit of event cinema surrounding a Marvel film. This was the first time I went to the cinema with hype and expectation to see a Marvel film, so it might as well be the first installment of Phase 4 because it feels like the first installment of Phase 4. I'm just give you a really quick plot synopsis, which you already know picks up exactly where we left off in Spider-Man Far From Home. He's swinging around with MJ. J. Jonah Jameson reveals his identity to the world because Mysterio has reached out from beyond the grave and implicated him both in his murder, in a load of the other bad stuff that went on, and revealed that he is in fact, of course, Peter Parker. His life immediately changes and is effectively ruined because with the celebrity that comes with being the most famous superhero in the world, he can't have a normal life, and he's still a kid, and his friends are still kids, more importantly. They can't have normal lives, they're not getting in to college, all this stuff is going on around them, everything is bad, so he goes to see Doctor Strange. And Doctor Strange is like, well, I can possibly help you, but I can't do the voice for that. I probably shouldn't, it could be quite dangerous. Oh, whatever, okay, I'll do it anyway, because we have to advance the plot. Somehow, when he messes with the spell and rips the arsehole of the universe open, and all the baddies from the previous Spider-Man films, most of them anyway, come pouring in. You know all this from the trailers. But of course, it's not just the villains. Is it the heroes from the previous Spider-Man movies? They come pouring through the tear in reality as well, and Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire appear for the final act of this film to unite their powers with that of Tom Holland's Peter Parker to save the day, to not beat, but to cure their former adversary. So they're not merely sending them back to their realities to die, they're giving them a second chance. It's genuinely quite an original premise for a Marvel film. It's executed reasonably well. This is not a review of the film, I should stress. There's good points, there's bad points, but overall, that is the story. And they managed to do it, but at a cost. And that cost, which is what we're going to talk about here, is that the spell, which is now ripping the universe asunder, no matter if they send them back, it's still too late, it's all pouring through. The spell that Doctor Strange initially tried to do, where everyone forgets who Peter Parker is, needs to be completed in order to fix this tear. So the ultimate sacrifice Parker makes is that he allows the world, that's Strange, that's all his former Avengers, that's his friends, his loved ones, and MJ, to forget everything about him. Now we'll get to the major MCU implications of all of that in a second, but this is a burden, a huge burden for Tom Holland's Peter Parker to carry that is not necessarily shared, but certainly understood by his other two namesakes. They understand the problems that come with wearing that mask. They understand how different it makes your life, how difficult it can make things as well. And while, of course, Tobey Maguire saying that him and MJ did manage to make it work and tells Andrew Garfield to, not think that you can't have what you want just because you saw Gwen Stacy die, there is still this weight on all of them that with great power comes great responsibility, but with Spider-Man cannot necessarily come Peter Parker. It's pretty well told, I think. And one of the major things to understand about the ending, I personally think, is not a narrative beat. It's that this is now the final chapter for Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire's respective Spider-Men's, or whatever. Because if you got to think, these are two people who were cherished in this role. There's never been any criticism of their portrayal of the character, but they both went out on critical duds. Spider-Man 3 got absolutely slated at the time. I'm old enough to remember it. It absolutely did. And The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was considered massively underwhelming and a complete mess. And yes, there is a bit of revisionism about them both at the minute, where they're starting to get a bit of just a resurgence in popularity. People have a soft spot for them, but this film is a far better ending for both of those characters than their previous films actually were. Now, that's got no implications really for the rest of the MCU, we presume, but as part of understanding the ending of this film, I think it's important. But that's the thing, isn't it? This movie, and indeed the ending and its implications, are not about those two. This is the MCU. My friends, they're never interested in the present or especially the past. They're interested in the future. They want you thinking about the doom on the horizon rather than the one knocking on your door. And here, here is no exception. Now, there are some implications here which are explicitly stated and some implications which are merely implied. I'm going to get to them first because you can do whatever you want with them in the comments, and indeed we probably will over the next couple of years. Anyway, so the movie ends with all the arrivals, all the guests, all the Gribblies being sent back to their respective realities. Now, in the case of the baddies, they've got a second chance. They've been fixed of whatever was driving them mad. Octavius has got that chip sorted. Osborn's got rid of the chemical that was making him insane and giving him all those voices. Electro's no longer obsessed with the power thing. Sandman is merely man now, and yeah, they've all got another chance, which means potentially the timelines from their movies could now be altered. Will they be? Can they be? Who can say? But they could be. And of course, if that is the case, that's quite interesting because then you can argue, would the events of Spider-Man 2, with Octavius exploring his whole power thing, would that happen if Osborn hadn't been killed in Spider-Man 1? If he'd at some point awoken, if he'd some point got rid of the evil demons in his head and that ending had been very different, would Spider-Man 2 have happened? Would Spider-Man 3 have happened? And the same, of course, is true of Andrew Garfield's reality. Would any of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 have happened or played out the same way if it wasn't for the Amazing Spider-Man 1? If Lizard just stopped being evil halfway through it? Who could say? They definitely want us to talk about that. They definitely want us to make videos about that. It's quite a fun image, isn't it? Because Dr. Ock's actually pretty specific about where he was pulled from in his reality. He was underwater with his hand, his claw, his tentacle clamped around Spider-Man's throat. And if he goes right back to that moment, now as a good guy, what's going to happen there? Peter, I'm good now. I'm totally chill. I should also point out, as they get sent back to their reality, as we discover in the post-credit scene, so too does Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock. He's sat there chewing a barman's ear off about Iron Man, about Thanos, about all the fun stuff he's missed because he's part of the Sony universe. He is then immediately transported back to his movies, but not before he leaves a tiny amount, a tiny piece of Venom on the table. Meaning that effectively Venom is now in the MCU. He was this big, he was just splotting around that bar, but he's there. Also, it's probably pretty fair to say at this point that if you've seen Loki, we can assume that were the Time Variance Authority still to exist during the events of this movie, it would probably have ended with a lot more of those pointy, meltier sticks, blah, 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 things they had. They would have been all over this, wouldn't they? The whole Loki plays into this so much now that you actually think about it, because him splitting the multiverse, getting away from the one true timeline is what has enabled this to happen. So anybody who's looking for movie to Disney Plus crossover, here it is in a roundabout way. And that is what the implicitly stated implications of the ending of this movie are. It is all about the multiverse. These events could not have been allowed to happen if the TVA was still there, so the events of Loki have directly influenced this being allowed to happen. There are people pouring in from so many different universes as Doctor Strange looks across the sky in New York and sees it torn asunder with so many things pouring through. That is all the different realities that would simply not have been allowed to exist, that weren't timed on this big loop at the end of Loki, and now they're all valid, now they all exist, now they're all technically canon. And that is where we leave it. That is where we leave Spider-Man. That's where we leave the MCU for the time being. The multiverse, for all we saw the door creak open in WandaVision and get booted off its hinges in Loki, it's now the thing in the MCU. For the Infinity Stones, with the thing in the first three phases, it's all about the multiverse now, the implications it presents, the possibilities it presents, and the stories it can help tell us. Which is a fairly big intergalactic implication for the end of the movie, when in fact we do actually end it with Peter Parker just getting a small apartment in New York, which is presented as run down and dilapidated. But if you've ever been to New York, you will know that getting a studio place to yourself in the city while you are an unemployed teenager is just, that was the most mind-bending thing in the film. For me, not the rifts in space and time, not Willem Dafoe's laugh, it was somehow getting a rent-controlled apartment in the center of New York. And of course, lovely bit of fan service moment, he somehow manages to make himself a new costume, presumably from Lycra, of the original 616 costume. Now if you don't know what that is, close your eyes and draw Spider-Man. That's probably the costume you're going to end up drawing. It's the iconic one he's always had in the comics, and while all the movies have tried to put their own personal spin on it, this is probably the most accurate, true to the original vision that he's ever looked. Which, let's face it, my friends, was a lovely slice of fan service in a movie that was almost exclusively fan service. So, how do you explain the ending of Spider-Man No Way Home? Well, one word, my friend: possibilities. Charlie Cox appears from the Netflix series. Tom Hardy appears from the Sony movies. Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire come out of retirement to play the same character in the same film after their legacy work in that role. Anything is on the table now. There is narrative justification for any creative decision they seemingly want to make. The way you explain the ending of this film is possibilities. And just to really ram that point home, the post-credit scene of this movie was not the usual Marvel approach of either showing you a scene from an upcoming movie or making something especially just to get a bit of a tease going. It was an out-and-out, balls-to-the-wall, full trailer, unseen at this point, for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, showing you exactly how much was going to be going down in that film. We saw Wanda, we saw evil Doctor Strange, we saw a lot. So that's it. Now nobody remembers Peter Parker. He is living his own life as your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but nobody, not his friends, not his loved ones, not his enemies, not the general public, know who he is. He nearly offloads all of this to MJ and Ned in the cafe, donut shop, or whatever it is, but he decides not to because he knows where that road leads. He goes to have a life of his own, which looks nothing like the life he had imagined. He started the movie talking about how much they needed a fresh start. And he gets it, just not the one he wanted. And that is where we leave both Spider-Man's story and the MCU as a whole. Where we go from here, in both regards, is absolutely anybody's guess. But I'll tell you this, my friends, for somebody who personally had really bad Marvel burnout after Endgame, I do think now it might be a hell of a ride. Don't know why I emphasize that so much, but whatever, we'll go with it. Let us know what you made of the film, as well as the ending and my explanation in the comments below. Of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can get me on Twitter at Adam Cleary, Clery. We've got so much. Oh my God, we've got so much Spider-Man content coming up for you this week, because it's just nice to get out and do things again, isn't it? But in the meantime, of course, thank you all so much for watching. I've been Adam Cleary, this has been What Culture, and I will see you soon. God, imagine if it came out with me there. Imagine that's how I found out. Oh well, bye.